60 years ago, Machine 2 was launched to travel across the galaxy to a selected planet. The entire journey, covering 20 light-years, was carried out without human control. Once Machine 2 reaches the planet's orbit, it will link up with the other machines, allowing instant travel between the two planets. A pilot is controlling a spaceship when he receives a message about two flight missions. The first, an unmanned probe, has successfully tested the connection and gathered basic data. The second, a manned mission, will orbit the planet twice, conduct a reconnaissance, and return. The team is reviewing the final data packet and confirms the necessary flight trajectories. They recommend one final adjustment of 24 degrees and 3.5 degrees. After confirming this, the pilot is instructed to begin the burn countdown. He follows the countdown, adjusting the ship's pitch and proceeding as instructed. As the burn continues, the team confirms that the ship has locked onto its entrance point. A 10-second countdown is initiated for machine engagement. As the countdown reaches 0, the pilot briefly wonders if there is a problem, but he is reassured that the link is confirmed and the path is clear for transit. After receiving final clearance, the pilot is told to proceed. Following instructions, he enters a black machine. The pilot lost consciousness after entering the machine, and the spaceship continued its descent. While he was still unconscious, a fuel low alert sounded. When he eventually woke up, he noticed an alarm warning of an impending atmospheric collision, along with a command to abandon the ship. Realizing the urgency, he quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up to prepare for evacuation. He put on his oxygen mask and sat down again as the ship descended closer to the ground. As it was about to land, the pilot opened the door, got pulled out, and safely landed with a parachute. The pilot woke up disoriented on the ground, glancing around at his surroundings. A dark cloud loomed in the sky, and the sound of an approaching storm filled the air. He gathered his belongings from the ground and started walking. Eventually, he reached the crash site and saw his ship, burning and completely destroyed. Afterward, he walked back and sat down to go through his bag. He pulled out 2 foil-wrapped food items, examined them briefly, then put them back. Checking a device on his wrist, he removed his helmet and took out a bottle, which he attached to his oxygen system. He began breathing heavily, then switched from the mask to just a tube in his nose. Lying on the ground for a while, he finally got up, removed the oxygen tube, and attempted to send a message. He identified himself as Captain James and transmitted his first message from planet E581. He reported a problem with the arrival, explaining that he had crash-landed. From what he could see, the planet was barren, with no signs of intelligent life. He mentioned having enough food and water for 5 days and expected to receive a response within 3 hours due to the communication delay. After taking out his bottle and drinking, the pilot suddenly heard a loud crashing sound nearby. He cautiously crawled up to check, but saw nothing in the area. Turning around, he noticed his bottle had fallen, spilling all the water. Frustrated, he threw the empty bottle in anger. Later that night, as he waited for a response, he ate his food while still hoping for contact. The next morning, he gathered his belongings and continued walking. He tried to communicate again, reporting to Com-1 that he had been on E581 for nearly 24 hours with no communication from the team. He hoped it was just an issue with his equipment and that rescue was already on the way. He mentioned losing his water supply and acknowledged that he needed to find a new source of water that day or there would be no one left to rescue. As Captain James continued walking, he heard the sound of flowing water and quickly ran towards it. Upon reaching the source, he saw it was indeed water and cautiously approached to confirm. He scooped some up with his hands, tasted it, and after being sure it was safe, he brought out a small bottle to test it further. Satisfied with his findings, he filled his water bottle and added a crushed pill to sterilize it. Once the water was treated, he drank it. Captain James continued his journey, stopping at one point to scan his surroundings with binoculars. As he looked into the distance, he spotted something and waved, hoping to get noticed. However, instead of a friendly response, they began shooting at him. He quickly ran with 2 robots chasing him, but he managed to hide and escape their pursuit. After losing the robots, he kept walking until dusk. As darkness fell, he heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. The noise startled him, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Looking up, he saw a building in front of him and made his way inside. Sitting down inside, exhausted and defeated, Captain James said to himself, "No one is coming for me." The next morning, Captain James sent another message, expressing his growing concern. He mentioned that he still hadn't received any contact and was running low on supplies, with only 3 rations left. He admitted he was starting to think of a backup plan. During his time on the planet, he had observed signs of intelligent life and noted they had machines. This led him to hope that, with their technology, they might be able to help him get back into orbit. For now, they were his only chance of returning home. After eating, Captain James lay on the ground and started having visions of himself with a child. But the peaceful moment was abruptly interrupted by a loud bang. He quickly got up, hid, and saw 2 robots approaching. Reacting swiftly, he ran in the opposite direction. While walking through the woods, he heard a noise and looked around, but saw nothing. He continued moving cautiously. As he sat, leaning against a tree, the sound of the robots drew near again. He immediately got up to run, but the robots spotted him and opened fire, injuring his hand. He fell to the ground, but despite the pain, he mustered his strength, grabbed a stick, and attacked one of the robots, managing to damage some of its parts. Although the robot remained standing, the distraction allowed James to escape. However, the injury on his hand worsened, and he collapsed. He quickly took out a bandage and wrapped it around his wounded hand to stop the bleeding. James woke up to find the robot standing next to him. Startled, he quickly stood up, gripping the stick, ready to defend himself. However, the robot showed no signs of aggression and remained still as he moved around it. Curious, James cautiously touched the robot with the stick, but there was no reaction. He then noticed that the robot seemed to be trying to move toward a small chip on the ground. Realizing the robot wanted the chip, James picked it up and the robot followed him without resistance. As they continued walking, James came across a container on the ground. He stopped and sent a message, reporting that he had discovered something unusual, a container covered entirely in alien writing. James eventually reached a house and entered. At first, it was dark, but as he walked in, lights illuminated the space, revealing a fully furnished home with a bed, cabinets, and other essentials. While exploring, he found a gun. He then tried to turn on a video player and watched footage of a family spending time together outside, cooking and enjoying themselves. As James continued looking through papers, the video took a sudden turn. A helicopter appeared in the scene, approaching the family. Moments later, an explosion occurred, and the video abruptly stopped playing. James spent the night in the house and woke up the next morning. He cleaned his wound and replaced the bandages. While examining the gun he found, it accidentally fired, narrowly missing him. Shaken, he quickly gathered his belongings, packed them into his bag, and prepared to leave with the robot following him. Sitting outside, James spoke to the robot, mentioning that he needed to find its owners. He touched the robot, but it didn't respond at first. When he tried again, the robot moved to the side. Seeing this, James placed his bag on the robot's back and the robot secured it before heading in another direction. James followed as the robot led him toward a distant factory. Along the way, James sent another message reporting that the planet's surface appeared to have been devastated by war. He speculated that the machines were still serving their creators who might be living underground. His hope was to make contact and, with luck, use their technology to find a way back home. When they finally reached the factory, James retrieved his bag and the robot stopped walking. After resting and eating, James put the bag back on the robot and they continued their journey. Eventually, the robot suddenly stopped in an open area with no clear reason. Confused, James noticed a white object fall to the ground, followed by smoke and gunfire erupting from the area. Looking up, he saw an aircraft hovering above, firing on the ground. Reacting quickly, James ran to a nearby house to take cover. Once inside, he called for the robot to join him, but it remained still. The aircraft continued its assault on the ground, and James hesitated, thinking about making a run for it. However, he changed his mind and rushed back to the robot. He grabbed his bag and ran, with the robot finally following him to the safety of the house. James and the robot took shelter in the house, but the aircraft continued firing at them. After a brief pause in the attack, he noticed a robot in front of him, firing at the wall. He quietly tried to slip past, only to encounter another robot. Feeling trapped and unsure of what to do, James grew frustrated. Spotting a clear path to the window, he ran toward it, escaping the house and distancing himself from the danger. After getting far enough away, James used his binoculars to scan the area. But still feeling confused and unsure of the situation, he continued walking with the robot that had been with him all along. As they moved forward, they came across a machine that suddenly made a loud noise and began firing randomly. James sprinted towards some stairs and saw aircraft passing overhead. He quickly entered through the stairs, but as he approached a door, an alarm began beeping and it opened, releasing a gust of wind that made him feel sick. Realizing the danger, he retreated to his bag, put on his mask, and grabbed the gun before approaching the door again. He descended the stairs cautiously. James cautiously walked through a sewer-like hallway, his gun raised. Suddenly, he saw a robot approaching him. He fired at it, but the robot was unaffected and continued moving toward him. Realizing his shots had no effect, James turned and ran, trying to escape. He reached a door and desperately tried to open it, but failed. With no other options, he braced himself for the robot's arrival. However, the robot simply opened the door and entered, completely oblivious to James. By the door, James noticed a body remnant on the ground. As he examined it, he suddenly received a message. Com1 informed him that they had received his transmissions, but there were ongoing communication issues. They mentioned that the machine insertion orbit was irregular, making it difficult to establish a reliable connection. While they expressed their desire to bring him back as soon as possible, they needed to resolve the cause of the problem first. James continued his journey and eventually reached a control room. On the security cameras, he saw numerous dead bodies scattered across different rooms, realizing with a sinking feeling that everyone on the planet was already dead. Overwhelmed by the hopelessness of his situation, he wondered how he could ever get home. In a burst of frustration, he struck the skeleton of the person sitting in front of the control panel, venting his anger. Just then, he received another message from Com1, informing him of a significant miscalculation on their end. They explained that the machine had arrived far too early, by about 5 solar orbits. This meant the machine had been on the planet much longer than expected. As James processed the message, he noticed a picture with a Bible verse on the wall, surrounded by old newspapers. Suddenly, it dawned on him that he was not on an alien planet as he initially thought, but on a post-apocalyptic Earth. He realizes that a devastating war wiped out humanity, leaving only machines behind. James finds out in the newspaper that his journey through the teleportation device was a key factor in the planet's destruction. As Captain James stepped outside and saw the aircraft in the sky, he initially gave up hope, believing there was no way to survive or escape. In a moment of despair, he took out his gun and was ready to end his life. However, he reconsidered at the last moment and chose to keep going, determined not to give up.